Dr. Jerry Punch. Jer Bear. Can I call it? Does anybody call you Jer Bear?
Only once, and then once a hospital bill came, he was fine.
Okay, so I won't call you that ever again.
This podcast is already over. Hope you enjoyed it, folks.
Yeah. If you could describe this Dinner with Racers in one word, what would it be?
Memorable, I think, because I got to sit here with two guys who love a sport I love, and we got to talk about some great moments in time.
Okay, it was just one word. We didn't ask for the sentence there.
Okay, annoying.
And now for Dinner with Racers, presented by
Continental Tire.
with your hosts, Ryan Eversley and Sean Heckman.
Placeholder radio sound. I'm a driver. I'm very angry. This is the sound of a driver on the radio during a race.
What do you think I should order?
Welcome to Dinner with Racers.
Dinner with Racers.
I'm your host, Ryan Eversley,
I'm Sean Heckman.
and we are currently driving from Charlotte, North Carolina down to Atlanta, Georgia to wrap up this 34-day trip. We did something like 13,000 miles across 25 states to bring you 29 episodes of Season 3, and we're sure you're going to complain about it.
But you shouldn't, because holy crap.
Holy
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 We have some huge names this year, and of course, one of those is Dr. Jerry Punch.
Jer Bear.
Now, if you don't know Jerry Punch's story, he is a true legend of the sport. He is truly a doctor. He was a trauma doctor for years at Halifax and Daytona Beach before running his own practice, but he's also done everything from being an ESPN commentator. He's been part of NASCAR. He's been part of IndyCar. And of course, he was in Days of Thunder, for crying out loud.
My favorite documentary.
So, here's some things you're going to learn about with Jerry Punch.
So we heard an insane amount of stories of fixing up drivers.
We learned why our current generation of drivers are a bunch of wussies.
We learned that Jer Bear wrote, directed, and cast the movie Days of Thunder.
He single-handedly found Nicole Kidman.
That's true. Started her career.
And he also talks about the world's most famous boom operator.
He did.
Yeah.
Short guy.
Huge thank you to Mr. Dario Franchitti for driving us in this lovely Acura MDX.
Do you think I can? Come on, can I sit in on this one, please?
No, that doesn't make
No.
sense. We already recorded
Yeah,
this.
this is like a month ago.
We already did it. You drove us there. Anyway, thanks to Acura for letting us use this lovely MDX, and of course, Continental Tires.
Continental Tire. Cross Contact. LX Sport. Jerry Punch.
Jer Bear.
Dr. Jerry.
DDS.
All right, we're going to start in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Ryan, nice to meet you.
Sean.
Sean.
Nice to meet you finally. Come, take a seat.
Sorry, that was
No, well, we're going to ask you about that, actually.
Yeah.
So, my first question is, did you know those folks in the lobby?
not really.
Okay, so you did kind of know them then.
Well, a little bit.
Okay.
One is some of the people are just sports fans. They come
Sure.
in, and I don't come downtown very much. If I could get a little more volume, I can hear myself, because I'm all these years in auto racing, I'm deaf.
Professional.
Yeah,
Went right
boom,
for
right
it.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't hear a lick.
Is this okay?
But it's my wife tells me I have selective hearing, but that's the one guy is a station manager for the CBS affiliate here in town.
Okay.
And so they are the host for the SEC network for college
makes
football.
sense, right.
And I've known him a long time. And,
Okay.
And there are rumblings in the community that's where I'm headed next, is to CBS.
Ah,
And so
very
that's why
good.
he was asking
Okay.
me that. He said,
Okay.
I said, I'm not at liberty to say.
Okay.
As long
I mean,
as
this is a great place to break news.
Yeah.
This
I said,
huge
I'm not
podcast.
at liberty to say as long
Fair
as the ESPN checks keep coming, you know.
Yeah, 10-4.
And,
Understood.
Yeah, but it's okay to sit while I'm talking, and there's something. Should I stand?
Right. You didn't wear a fire suit. We were really hoping you were going to wear a fire suit.
Okay, all right, it's okay. Oh my gosh.
Because see, so I come from California, and college football in California, like, it's a big deal if you're like near Stanford or near Cal or whatever. But I mean, we're in Knoxville, Tennessee,
Right.
and obviously, beyond the motorsport stuff that we know you from, the college football is the sort of other half of your job while you were at ESPN. And so I think in a town like this, like, you can't go anywhere.
Oh well, it's interesting because there are people who who are big NASCAR fans.
Right.
And for many years, ESPN would tell us that there's a tremendous crossover between the NASCAR fan on Sunday and the college football fan on Saturday. You walk into a parking lot at Talladega, and you'll see all these Alabama and Auburn stickers, and here you'll see these Earnhardt stickers. You know, they'll go Vols on one side, another's Earnhardt, and people know you from different genres. People say, well, you do college football. You called that game at USC last week. I was out in Southern. Yeah, I did that game. And he said, but wait a minute. Now, tell me about Bill Elliott. Is he still really a nice guy? And Chase Elliott. And what's going on? How about Scott Dixon? What kind of guy? It's just funny how people will say these things.
Yeah.
And
is Scott Dixon a nice guy?
Oh, he's a great guy. He's the best.
Got any dirt on him?
Not really, other than he way over married. Emma is just absolutely. Not only is she a doll baby, she is the sweetest lady and a great mom. And
we're having lunch with him tomorrow, so it's funny that you mentioned him as a reference.
With Scott? Well, please tell him I said hello.
Well, maybe he'll come up later. Actually.
Maybe I'll tell you. Unbelievable guy.
Yeah,
unbelievable guy.
So Knoxville, Tennessee. I mean, huge college football town. Presumably a big NASCAR side of the world.
It is.
Can you go to a restaurant like this?
It's funny. No, it's most the people are so nice. You walk in, these guys at the bar and want to talk college football.
Yeah.
When I would do games here a lot, when I did the primetime Saturday night games, we'd come down here after a game because you can walk down to the stadium and come in here, and it's just great fans, both sides. I did a Georgia Tennessee game a few years ago, and there were Georgia fans and Tennessee fans in here, and you just got to be careful that one of the analysts I was with had said some things about Tennessee he probably shouldn't have said. So I just told him, make sure you wear a hat or something down there and sunglasses.
Yeah, right.
He said, it's 10 o'clock at night. I said, it doesn't make a difference. Wear a hat and sunglasses. They'll know who you are.
Stand 10 feet away from me.
Stay away because these people here are hunters for a living, and they're real good shots. Davy Crockett, exactly. It's a great town. It's a great sports town. Yeah. I do for fun. Yeah. I do a 1 hour a week on a local sports radio show. It's on the Ball Network, so it's and we take calls on sports, and it's amazing how you would think a lot of the calls would be college football.
Yeah. We
used to get college football a lot. We used to get a lot of NASCAR. Now we get a lot of Open IndyCar calls because of Joseph Newgarden.
Yeah. Okay.
Joseph Newgarden is the first major open wheel champion from Tennessee in history.
Yeah.
Now Sammy Swindell, people who are sprint car guys know that Sammy Swindell from Bartlett, Tennessee, which is just outside of Memphis, he's a 3-time World of Outlaw champion. And then of course Darrell Waltrip from Franklin, but he's really from Owensboro, Kentucky, so he came across the line.
I've seen people in Tennessee, they know. Like
you know. They will say, well, Darrell Waltrip was the champion from Tennessee, and I said, well, I'm proud of what Darrell accomplished. Most Tennesseans say we don't claim him. No, no, I just kidding. I'm just joking.
If I'm from California around here, should I never mention that?
No, that's fine. Hey, Tennessee went and played at Cal a few years ago.
Okay.
And that's right after I moved here, and people came back and said, do you know? They went to the Cal game in Berkeley. Said, you know, there are people sitting in trees out there.
Yeah, right.
There were people sitting in trees out there, and there were people standing at the bottom of the trees trying to get them out.
Right.
And they were coaxing them. They have and there were fans here. I got a friend of mine's a judge here, and he's a fairly well-known judge, and he said there was a guy at the bottom of the tree and some other people trying to talk these people out of the trees.
Right.
In Tennessee, we don't talk about trees. We take a chainsaw and we cut the tree down, and they come down quickly.
Right.
You fire that chainsaw up, they'll come right down.
It's like 100%.
He said the second or third tree, and they get the message.
Yeah, different world, my friend. I like it.
So, speaking of football, you were a walk-on backup quarterback at NC State?
I was a backup. May not describe how far back I was.
Okay.
I was a walk-on at NC State, and my freshman year, and Lou Holtz was the head coach, and he couldn't have been nicer to me. To this day, he tells me when he came into broadcasting that first time that we ran the veer offense, the option veer. And I was a decent rollout passer. I was a baseball pitcher, so I had a decent arm.
Right.
Didn't have a lot of height, didn't have a lot of speed, had no speed, as a matter of fact. But he told me when I ran the first time he saw me run the option, he knew I'd make a really good medical doctor someday.
Yeah.
But he hated fumbles. So our starting quarterback had a fumble in the scrimmage, and our backup quarterback had a fumble in the scrimmage, and I guess the third string guy might have been sick, and fourth string guy might have missed his flight.
Sure,
I don't know.
sure.
But anyway, somehow I get on the field, and he calls a triple option. And I'm determined that I'm going to show him that my foot speed,
Right.
which I should have known better because I have none.
Sure.
And so I pull the ball. You take the snap, you reverse around, you pull it out of the belly of the fullback, and you go down the line and you option the first man out to the tackle's block. I fake the pitch, I turn it upfield, and I am wide open. And I go about 10 yards down and I get hit, and the whistle's blowing. Here comes Lou down the field, and he's puts his arm around me as we're walking back with that lisp. He's spitting in my face every other word. And he says to me, "Punch, it's not that you're slow. It's just you reach your maximum speed quicker than everybody else." Yeah. And so I said, "Thanks, Coach." And I realized a little later that wasn't a compliment.
Right.
It was not a
You
compliment.
shouldn't run. Yeah.
So keeping the ball was not an option for me.
Fair enough. So, I mean, we've done our diligence in terms of research, but so you go to school for, hopefully to play football, but where did the degree in zoology come in and eventually medical school?
Well, I grew up in a small town in North Carolina, and we had one GP in town, one general practitioner.
Okay.
And he was like Marcus Welby. This guy had a little white house, frame house on the corner on the court square.
Yeah.
Picket fence. Dr. Sennett, old Dr. Sennett was his name. And you go down there and you walk in and you sit in the living room, and his office, his exam rooms were right down the hallway, and right before you got to the kitchen. Sure. And he had a big table in the kitchen. People would come in, farm people would come in, couldn't afford to pay him, and they'd bring a bag of tomatoes or corn or okra or whatever. And so, hey, you know what? You can't tax okra.
Yeah.
So although in California, I don't know. They probably could.
I'm saying nothing.
Do you know what okra is?
Kind of.
Kind of. Okay.
I've heard the word, but never mind.
Anyway, tomatoes. You know what tomato is?
I've heard of it.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So they. But that's what I wanted to grow up and be a. And he was my hero. When I was like 5 years old, I can remember it. And I had a croup, and I was running fever 100, 405. Back then, he's the only doctor in the whole county. He'd come out and make a house call, even though he was a busy man. 2 o'clock in the morning, he takes me, and I'm burning up with fever. In the dead of winter, he puts me into a tin tub out on the back porch, and they pour water in it, and I'm shaking, and suddenly I'm shivering, but it breaks the fever, so I remember just how special he was. So I wanted to be a small town general practitioner.
Yeah.
So I get a chance to go to college, walk on to play a little football, and then I wanted to go to pre-med, but they didn't have a pre-med major at NC State. It's an engineering school. Okay. So I said I could take all the same courses and be in biology and zoology. So I sort of had a double major I majored in like chemistry and math, and then I had a zoology degree.
Right.
And I was sort of the guy. I love math and love chemistry, and I hated taking humanities courses, and the anthropologies and stuff. And that's really what happened. I went straight from there to med school. I was very, very fortunate. My brother was a much better athlete. He was 5 years older than me. He was an All-American at NC State.
Oh, cool.
He was a baseball player.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And anyway, that's how that worked. And then, I'd play. I played in the spring game my freshman year. Played in the spring football game at Carter Finley Stadium. Got in the car, drove like crazy 2.5 hours to Metrolina Speedway in Charlotte to run a 100-lap feature that night.
Nice.
And Ned Jarrett was the promoter, by the way. Ned was like a second father to me. So he was. So that's sort of how that all happened.
And so that's the cool thing about you. It's not that you fell into broadcasting and learned to like the sport. Between the two sports you've covered the most, you grew up as a racer. Yeah. And grew up as a football player. So these are things that sort of naturally grew into what you're doing.
And being a medical doctor, they said, and I love sports, and they, was in Florida, and I'm over at the Speedway, and they, they called, and it's funny how, I loved the sport, knew it inside out. We had a guy in our family, we called him Uncle Bobby. He really wasn't my uncle, but Bobby Isaac was because he was adopted into the family, but we called him, he was like, so I followed his career growing up when I was little. Land speed records at Bonneville and the K&K Dodge, and being around his race shops. I'd be around the race cars and growing and see all these legends and racers around. I'm this little guy. Yeah. And then when I was in high school, Hickory Speedway, which is the legendary short track in the Carolinas, was right behind my grandfather's farm. So we'd be out there on the farm, and every Saturday from about noon on, you hear the cars practicing and getting ready for that night. And my grandfather Sam was a security guard at the Speedway. And what the guy, the promoter of the Speedway at Hickory, he knew a lot of short tracks they're pretty rowdy, you know, they had fights and stuff, and people were stealing money at the gates. And so what he did, it's North Carolina, he went to the churches in the area and said, I want to hire your deacons of your churches to be my gate guards. I'll pay you well, and I'll donate back to every church. And then I'm going to hire the ladies of the church, these good old country women, to come in and cook in the concession stand. I mean, you won't find better.
Sure.
You talk about fresh-made meatloaf and mashed potato. I mean, it wasn't your typical concession stand. I mean, people would go there just to eat, and I have to watch the race.
Have you not had the meatloaf at Daytona?
Yeah,
phenomenal.
I mean, that's the way it was. So, but I would go when I was little. I would go with my grandmother, and we would sit up in the stands. My grandmother would bring him a big thermos of coffee, and she'd make her homemade pimento cheese. You know, grind up the cheese and pimentos, and we'd sit there and watch these cars go by. And some guy named Ralph Earnhardt, and we called him Dink Widenhouse, and you know, the Richard and Lee Petty would come by. You know, the 42, 43. It was just, you know, amazing back in those days. And then that's how I grew up. And then I started, as I became a teenager, I started not only working on the barn, I'm working on tractors, I worked on race cars in the area. And I'd volunteer working on race cars. So that's really how I started.
And so I'd heard a story that you were working, I thought, as like maybe taking tickets or something one night, or maybe doing the scoreboard.
Yeah.
And the main commentator couldn't be there that night, and Ned Jarrett came to you and said, hey, I need somebody in the booth. Get up there.
Well, yeah, what it was is I worked up there in the scoreboard, you know, and Ned was the promoter. And Ned would do the announcing, and I sat beside him, and I was in medical school, and Ned would pay me just enough money to go back to med school. It was a great night to get my brain cleared for a few hours, and I'd make like $35 a night, and that was enough to buy diapers and formula and macaroni for the week, and you know that's how we sort of. And so Ned was actually going to Darlington to be inducted into the National Motorsports Press Association Hall of Fame, and he had hired Barney Hall, the legendary MRN announcer, to come host, because it was a ladies' night. So it was going to be a packed house. I mean, going to be 3,000, 4,000 people there.
Right.
And so Ned's gone, and Barney got the dates mixed up. So because Barney was at the NMPA in it too.
Sure.
And Ned walks in and sees Barney hosting that night. We're in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, the only person to track besides Ned's mom, Ned's wife, was his youngest son, Dale.
Okay.
He was a few years younger than mine. And
We've
Dale,
heard of him.
At the time, Dale was very bashful, and he runs up on the tower and said, Dad's not here. We have no announcer, and I'm not going to talk.
Right.
You know, what am I going to do? And he said, you got to do it. You know, everybody called me Doc.
And how old are you, like 23, 24?
I probably will see. Probably 23. So I pick up the microphone. I'd seen Ned, you know, and I start calling the show. And we have a pre-race show, blah, 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 and all the races, events, and then I'm calling the races. Well, Ned gets back the following week, and here finds out, that, hey, it went pretty well, and I guess he got some compliments from people in the crowd. And he said, why? He said, why? Ned said, why am I killing my voice on Saturday night when I got to get in my van and drive to wherever MR is on Sunday when I could have you split it with me?
Right.
Well, what happened then, I started doing that, and then Ned had me go with him to do qualifying at the Cup races because there was no live qualifying back then. He'd pull his van in and do them on a local FM station out of Statesville, a 50,000-watt FM station that would go all the way up into Virginia, West Virginia, and South Carolina. And so he'd pull the van right on the pit road behind where the cars are lined up, the Bush van.
That's awesome.
And Ned and I would sit there and do qualifying, and we'd put the doors of the van open, and the drivers would go out to qualify and come back in, they'd climb out and come and get in the van and talk to us.
No way.
Come get them. And
just like today.
If somebody would be angry, Ned would say, hey, Doc, go get him. So I'd go get Cale. I'd go get David Pearson, whatever.
That's awesome.
And some of these guys would sit in the van forever and just chat. Marty Robbins, the legendary country music. Marty and I, at the end of the show, after the last car would get ready to go, Ned would say, I got to go do the Bush Polo Award because that's what he was working for too. And I would finish up with Marty or whoever and then close the show down. So that's really how it all started.
Yeah.
Nice. You couldn't just tweet it out?
Yep. What's that?
You couldn't just tweet out the results?
No, you couldn't do that. You couldn't do that back then.
Couldn't get a signal.
Not at all.
That's incredible if you think about it. Like, you see, like, any of the legends of the sport being like, is this the van? I'll hop in this one. Yeah, like.
I mean, these guys, and I'd go in them and say, hey, David Pearson, Richard Petty, you name it, Cale. All these guys would come to the van, and they would tell stories. Marty Robbins was unbelievable. And I got to know these guys so well and be around them so much that it was like family. And so when Marty ran his last race at Atlanta, he'd had his heart problems and came back and was going to run some more and ran a few laps and had an issue. Well, he went in the garage area. So our producer back then, I was doing television, doing ESPN, producer said, how about you running back there and interview Marty because you know him. And I went back there, and I'm walking in the garage, and I can see he's the only car in there. He's way back in the back of the garage where some of the guys that, lesser funded teams were. And I see him get out of the car, and he's really, you could tell he's struggling a little bit to breathe. He'd had the heart issue. And he leans on the side of the car, and he looks left, and he looks right, and he looks down at his feet, looks around. I guess basically he's saying, it's over. It's over. I know I can't do this. This has been a great life, and I've enjoyed it. And I got there, and he was typical Marty. Couldn't have been nicer. And then a few weeks later, he was gone. We lost him. So, those are the kind of things, great memories of being a part of this sport over the years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and thinking back on those days, did that van have a bumper sticker that said, if this van's a talking, don't come a knocking?
It should have. It should
have.
Saying. Yeah.
They needed me.
Yeah, exactly. Ned Jarrett would drive. It was a big Anheuser-Busch van. Remember the old logo with the mountains and the Busch mountains? And he's driving down to Darlington. He and I were driving. We drove, and I got to ride with Ned a lot of places. So I'd hear all the great stories of back when he was racing with Fireball Robertson. I mean, all the legendary stories. And we're driving down through the Petey area of South Carolina on our way to Darlington. It's 104 in the shade. We're headed down for the Southern 500 on Thursday. And we're about 10 miles from the speedway, and it's just dusty, and it's got to be just stifling. It's got to be at least 100. And there's a farmer out on a tractor about maybe a quarter of a mile out in this field, and there's dust everywhere. And qualifying, it's like 10 o'clock in the morning. Qualifying starts at 1, so we got plenty of time. We're only 10 miles away. And Ned says, hang on a second. This is the kind of guy Ned Jarrett was. He pulls the van over and says, what are you going to do? He says, hang on. He goes in the back of the van, opens up the cooler in the back of the van. He's got a bunch of Busch beer iced down for qualifying. He grabs one out of the bottom of that cooler. He walks out, tromping out across that field, waves to the farmer, goes all the way up. The guy stops the farmer. He hands him that Busch beer, talks to him for a minute, comes back. I said, what are you doing? He said, first of all, I work for Anheuser-Busch. He said, so that he will never taste a beer that tastes any better than that one out there. He'll become a Busch beer fan from now on. So that's one check mark. Number two, I said, hey, man, the qualifying starts in a couple hours. Have you coming to the racetrack? He said, I ain't never been down there. I'm too busy on the farm. He said, well, look, he said, get it done. I got a couple tickets here for qualifying. He had them in his pocket, free qualifying coupons. Come on down and watch qualifying. So number two, he was an ambassador for the sport, ambassador for Busch, and ambassador for NASCAR. So when the first couple of years when I was a voting member for the Hall of Fame committee, and we were trying to determine who to put in the Hall of Fame, someone said, we got all these guys on our list. Anybody have a? So I stood up and I told that story about Ned Jarrett. I said, if that's not an ambassador and that's not a guy that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, I don't know what is.
That literally just gave you chills.
Yeah, that is.
That's incredible.
Well, and when you think about like today's modern crop in terms of that combination between being a winning driver, a capable guy, but also just understanding the all-around aspect of the sport from the marketing side, who would you say comes closest to that now?
Comes closest to understanding.
To just sort of being understanding the entire sport all around, being a great ambassador, and not just being a driver or this role or that role.
Well, it's hard to say. There's so many of these guys. So many of these guys understand how that the sport's in a real critical period right now in terms of in open wheel racing and stock car racing. Open wheel racing has been there off and on and has been able to climb out of. Stock car racing is there now, and they've got to figure it out. And so but there's guys that there's guys that are always accommodating for the fans. I'll tell you, Matt Kenseth, for example, to me, doesn't get near enough credit for what he does with the fans. He will not walk anywhere in the garage area. I actually saw him in a mall. I saw him in a Home Depot in Charlotte. My wife and I were in, and he'd been working on something on his house. He was dirty, just while he and his wife were in there
buying Stanley tools.
Some people,
as you do,
exactly. People came in, and somebody yelled, and he went all the way across the store to say hello to some kids and sign stuff.
That's cool.
Carl Edwards was always that way.
Yeah,
I think there's so many. That's one of the reasons that the Richard Pettys of this world and the Dale Jarretts and the Mark Martins and all these guys were just so good. Jeff Gordon was always pretty good. Now, when Jeff got there initially, I think he was a little bit intimidated by suddenly the celebrity status. And so remember he went through that period of having the security guards around him and push people away.
Right.
I was in Dale Earnhardt's bus in Daytona. I think after Jeff won his first championship, and he comes out of the garage area in February, and people are just wanting to swarm him. And Jeff's not a big guy. He's young too, very young, and having to learn. Well, he's got security guards in front of him. And so we're back there in the bus, and Earnhardt's watching the TV feeds. Look at that. Boy's got security guards around him. So, man, you can't have that. So he sent his manager, said, go get that boy and bring him in here. And so they went and got Jeff Gordon and brought him in there and said, man, you got to ditch the security guards. And Jeff said, you understand? Dale said, I do understand. I've won a bunch of these.
Yeah.
And said, I was a lot of people around you. I get it. He said, he said, you just got to. He said, what do I do? And Dale said, you just don't ever stop walking. You sign an autograph and keep walking. You just sign one and keep walking. If you ever stop and get surrounded, you're dead in the water. You're going to have to, he said, but don't ever stop. Just keep walking and signing. And he said, but ditch the security guard. Man, that's not what we do. Having these people close to us is what makes this sport so special. And that was great advice from Dale. I mean, and they became, friends, even though he toasted him with milk, at the championship awards banquet in New York. But, that's lot of good. But answering your question, who now? Everybody in their own ways. A lot of guys in their own way that really are that really. Some of the guys, the young guys, get it. And are, I always thought Carl Edwards did such a nice job. And we're being great champ. Kyle Busch was a great champion. Kyle, it's amazing. And I would say this to Kyle because I have said this to Kyle, but maturity, having a few extra birthdays and getting married, marrying a wonderful woman, helped him so much in so many ways, and he was a wonderful champion for the sport. Kevin Harvick, has been a great spokesman for the sport. I just, and I think that probably today, among the names that are the most competitive, the guys I think that probably get it the most are someone like Martin Truex Jr.
Sure.
Because he grew up, he understands. His dad was a racer.
Right.
It was Dale Earnhardt who gave him a chance and called him, and he hung up on him thinking it was a prank from his buddies.
Right.
And Dale said, boy, don't hang up on me again. And it was him calling to give him a shot.
Right.
And because Dale knew his daddy, and I knew Martin's dad, Martin Sr.
Yeah.
And Martin is such a good person. He's no different today than he was before he ever won his first race. And he's so unassuming. He's a Scott Dixon kind of guy. He'll fit in anywhere with anybody because he's just that kind of person.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So our joke we had was you have a degree in zoology and you're a doctor. That's not a veterinarian?
Nope. I'm a regular people doctor. So
our hope was this whole time.
I would say normal people, but they're not any normal people.
No, they never are.
And if you ever watch television, you don't find any normal people.
Our hope was this whole time that you're Dr. Jerry Punch, but what no one knew is that you were a veterinarian.
Yeah.
That would have been, you would have made us so happy if that was true.
No, but the medical doctor, it's like people. The one guy thought I was a dentist one time, came out pit road and had his finger in his mouth. Said, "What should I do with that?" I said, "I think you should see a dentist."
You should probably talk to someone else.
And he said, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a trauma doctor. If you get shot, give me a shout." I said, if you get a bullet hole or a stab wound or a heart attack, stroke, let me know. I said, we have discounts on Tuesdays.
Well, and you were, and I mean, I think a lot of people know this, but you were a trauma surgeon.
I was an ER physician,
okay,
trauma physician.
Okay.
We saw a lot of stuff that I worked in
which
Florida.
Hospital?
Worked in Florida. I had an ER group when I went to Florida. I worked at Halifax Hospital right down from Daytona.
Yeah,
so then I started my own. I worked for somebody else. I started my own company just north of Florida, north of Daytona there. So I was always close to the Speedway.
Sure.
And then when I would take off on weekends and fly to go do races, then we're going to fly on the NASCAR planes. So they would call me. One of the pilots would call me, or Mr. France would have somebody call me and say, "Find out what time Doc Punch can leave." And I'd say, "Well, I can be out of here at 3 o'clock on Thursday." They were so good to me because otherwise I couldn't go. But they would fly, and I would grab this. I'd be in my scrubs. I'd get over to the NASCAR hangar, pull my scrubs off, put on a pair of jeans and a navy blazer, and jump on the plane and go.
Wow.
And then we'd do the race in Michigan or Dover or whatever on Sunday night. It'd be after inspection, we'd get back on the plane, 8 o'clock, be back there at 11, 12. I had to be in the ER at 6 in the morning.
Back to work.
Back to Daytona Beach.
Wow.
Back to work. So, but it was great. They were so good to me. Now, if the Francis needed something, growing up, if I needed to help anybody, I was more than happy to. They were so good to me.
Yeah.
Couldn't have been nice. Bill France Sr., wonderful man, big giant of a man, soft-spoken, and And I love that man because he cared so much about his race teams. Bill French Jr. was so wise. I mean, unbelievably smart, and he ruled with an iron fist. That wisdom and that iron fist rule is what we're missing a little bit today.
Sure.
Really interesting.
Well, you kind of see that across a lot of different motorsport disciplines. So, actually, one of the questions I had, so my mother's a nurse practitioner, and one of the most common things that happens to her away from work is like the neighbors will come over with their kid having a fever or something like that, and they want her to deal with it. And she's always very sketchy to do that because she's terrified of being liable or whatever.
And you are, really.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
If you're a medical practitioner, that's why people used to fuss at me because I would stop at accidents on the highway to help out. I mean, and I did. It's funny. I was working in an ER just north of Daytona, off and on before I started my own company. And during Speed Weeks, I was the PA announcer for Volusia County Speedway, the big half-mile dirt track, and they had the World Series of Dirt and had hundreds of legendary dirt track races from all over the country. So it's every night. Well, I'm doing PA at the Speedway Daytona during the daytime, and then doing MRN in the afternoon. So just I'm on call at night in the emergency room. So aside from that, I was really a lot busier than I should have been. But burning the candle. But I'm out there, and I get out. The race gets over at midnight. I'm driving back down. I think it's Highway 40 from Ocala back toward Daytona Beach. And there's a horrendous car. There's a car on fire in the middle of the highway. Some kids in a Mustang that were flying down the straight road and hit a family in a big sedan. And the cars hit head on, and both cars exploded. And the big sedan rolled into a swamp. And I'm down there, and it's just a horrible scene. I mean, the grandparents in the front seat are dead, and one of the parents in the back. And she's holding a child, and I'm in there. I'm literally in the swamp in the car. A paramedic was coming from the racetrack. He stopped and put his big light down there where I could see, and I put a central line in her heart to try to keep her fluid volume up to keep her alive enough to get her to the hospital. Well, the ambulance gets there, and the guy recognizes me because I'm the ER doc at the hospital in town. So, and I get all this done. And then they get back to the hospital, and the ER doc there, and the trauma guys on call said, "Who did this?" And it was a Dr. Punch. And what's he doing out there? Kind of deal.
Right.
But they had no idea that I had another life.
That's what you did,
that
right?
was what I did. Sure. But you do those kind of things, but you do worry about,
I was going to say, it's like at the track. How often is it? Hey, can you look at this thing on my arm? Like, is that a common thing? Because I assume you want to get the heck away from those kind of questions.
You do.
Well, Dr. Punch said it was fine.
Do you have any penicillin?
Yeah.
I've injected more people. I put IVs in drivers that were. I got called to a driver's hotel room. It actually was right down the hallway from my room at Wilkesboro one night, and he was leading the points, and he had he was a big time driver. And he was doubled over in pain. His wife said he's having a heart attack. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning, so they called me. They didn't have cell phones back then. They just called the front desk and knew I was staying there, and they rang my room, and I said, "I'll be right there." He's doubled over in pain. Well, he was having a gallbladder attack. And so I called his primary care guy back in Alabama, and we talked about everything that needed to happen. And he said, "I got a race tomorrow. I'm leading the points. I'm on the front row." I said, "Man, you can't." So I said, "We'll talk about it." I said, "Tell you what I'll do. We'll get you fixed up here tonight. Tomorrow morning when we get to the racetrack, I'm going to call the medical center at Wake Forest. They're sending a helicopter up. I'm going to have them put this fluid on. We're going to put an IV in the morning in the garage area. We'll find a private place, put the IV in. We'll give you some stuff." And I said, "And I'm going to check with your crew chief." He said, "You can't tell anybody." I said, "Listen, I'm going to check with your crew chief like every 30, 40 laps. As long as you're talking clearly and he can hear you and I can hear you, I'm not. But if you start getting a little bit fuzzy, I'm going to go to NASCAR. We're going to pull you off the racetrack." He said, "Otherwise, I'll do it now." He said, "No, deal, we're good." So, I mean, I went, no one ever knew. I'm doing the broadcast on ESPN. No one ever knew. And the guy finished second in the race. But, I mean, that's the kind of stuff you do but people trust you. They trust me as a medical doctor. And I would never let them put themselves in a position to compromise, themselves on the racetrack. I've had that happen Dale Jarrett. I can use the name because Dale told the story. Dale Jarrett was leading the points and had broken a rib. I think he broke a rib in a wreck at Charlotte. And we go to Dover next week. He's got 2 broken ribs. And he's trying to get in the car at Dover, and he ran 1 lap, and he's screaming in pain. He can't breathe. So we called a local anesthesia place there, and they sent an anesthesiologist out to the racetrack. And I told him, I said, "Well, here's what we got to do. We got to block this nerve. These 2 nerves on the ribs here," and this anesthesiologist said, "I can't do that. I'm not going to swab this guy yet and put a needle in his chest. What happens if I collapse his lung?" I said, he's already short of breath. What, you know,
Yeah.
And they said, I can't do that. So I did it.
Yeah, but I say it might make his crew chief's life easier.
We did a nerve block right there right outside the garage at Dover. He got in the car and won the championship.
So you're like the dream doctor to have on site then.
Can I just say that, like, nowadays it's like, yeah, that guy spun me, mean tweet. And then here's those guys like, yeah, go ahead and stick the needle in here.
Yeah.
Let's get these.
I got a race today.
Right, exactly.
Richard Petty had had this long series of races. It's a true story. Long series of races where he had not missed a race. Yeah. And he's in Daytona, and it might have been one of the CBS races where the wheel breaks and he hits the wall and bounces it off the wall, and you can see on the camera, the onboard camera, he goes forward. He leans so far because the belts weren't really good back then. He hits his right shoulder on the crossbar, and it pushes the shoulder out the back, dislocates the shoulder out the back. So, they bring him to the Enfield Hospital, and the next week is Richmond, 400 laps at Richmond on the fairground. And we get up there, and Dale Inman, his crew chief, and them called me and said, Doc, what are we going to do? He's got to drive. And I said, well, he said, it's back in place, but he couldn't move his shoulder because it would fall, it would go out. It had to be. He said, but he's got to drive, and we can't drive one hand. I said, let's cock the seat up, move the shifter over. Back then you didn't have road racing shifters, and I said, you just have to move his wrist. And I said, as far as the pain's concerned, let's talk about this. We had some discussions, and Richard was literally inhaling Goody's headache powder.
Wow.
Remember he used to promote the Goody's
headache
headache
powder. He's a man
powder?
of a sponsor.
That's why he has no stomach now, but because he ate through. So we said, okay, race morning we go in there and we're going to tape his shoulder in place. So we had his white T-shirt on. He's just real skin and bones. We put the white T-shirt on. We tape, and he moves his arm out and it comes out. And I said, because the T-shirt's moving. I said, Richard, we got to take the T-shirt off and tape you. So we put all this white tape on, hospital tape. He moves it, it comes out. I said, Richard, we had to go to driver introduction. I said, tell you what, I told Dale Inman, get the duct tape. So we took silver duct tape and black duct tape, and we taped his shoulder in place to his skin. And he could move his arm down here, but it stayed in good. And so I kept checking. Richard ran every lap of that race, and I told Dale Inman, I said, now when the race is over, I said, and bring him, and I'd go by every 50 laps and check on him. I said, Richard, he said he hadn't complained, he hadn't said a word.
Yeah.
He said he's probably just gritting his teeth, just trying to hang on.
Right.
But I think he finished one lap down, like 10th or whatever. But
That's a win.
He ran 399 laps, with a dislocated shoulder.
Right.
And I said, when the race is over, bring him back to the hauler and sit him down here and then take his fire suit off and let him just sit here and cool down for like 30, 35, 40 minutes. I said, don't touch him for 40 minutes. And so a week later, they came to me and said, what was the deal about having him come back here and cool off for 40 minutes? I said, well, I wanted to be able to get off the air on MRN and get the heck out of here before you start pulling that duct tape off. He said, he was screaming. I said, I wanted to be out of the racetrack before you started hearing that squall from the duct tape. But those guys back then were gladiators.
That's like dire. I mean, you are like committed at that level. That's amazing. Awesome.
And he did it. He drove. He never complained once.
Yeah.
I hope every sports car driver just heard that story next time they complain about their cool suit.
Or like, my drink bottle wasn't the right one. That was someone else's drink bottle.
Yeah, Richard's said his best ever birthday present one year. His birthday was July 2nd, I think, 2nd or 3rd. He said his best ever. He told Dale Inman. He told Chief. He said, Maurice Petty. He said, what do you want for your birthday? We're going to Daytona. And Richard said, air conditioning. And so they went and got a box. They went and got an igloo cooler, an old-time igloo cooler, and they put ice in it and a fan motor and a tube that ran to his face, and that was his air conditioner.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was the first ever
we
modified
still use that
suit.
now.
Just like Pratt and Miller. It's the same thing.
Same as in sports car racing.
Yeah.
It seems like there's been quite a lot of situations for you that have happened, because what's important to point out is, like, while you're dealing with duct taping Richard Petty's shoulder in place, you're then turning and going to MRN or whatever broadcast team you're with at the time and calling the race and calling pit lane. These aren't like, hey, good thing Dr. Punch is here, we can just pull him over and have a look at it. It's like, hey, when you get a minute finishing up with that Wood Brothers pit stop, can you come glue someone's leg back together or whatever it is?
Well,
you know what I mean? Like, these aren't planned out. You're not there for that reason, but you're a doctor nonetheless.
You're not. I've been very blessed, and I've told people I've worked with have been very understanding. They know that if something happens on pit road, someone's injured or critically injured, and I'm an ER doc. I'm trained, and calling a pit stop has to take a back seat. I have to go do what I'm trained to do, and they knew that. They knew that, and I've irrigated gasoline out of people's eyes and gas men and get guys that have been. I was in a big fire. One of the reasons we wear fire suits is because we were doing the race in Atlanta. Richard Petty's car backfired and caught on fire, and the gas man was on fire, and my assistant, Nelson Crozier, and I, the two firemen that were the volunteer firemen, they boogied in opposite directions. And then he's on fire. His apron's on fire, and so we laid him down. And there was a mat there that on the ground they'd used to be able to roll the cans without. And so we rolled a mat around him, and then we were on ABC, and I had a Navy blazer, a wide motorsports blazer on. And when I stood up together after we got him okay and got him loaded, I stood up to give the report. I had a mustache. Mustache was saying the hair was gone off my arm and forearm. The windscreen on my mic was melted, and so. And I was sort of scorched a little bit, but I wasn't burned. So our big boss at ABC, when I left the track that day on the way to the airport in Atlanta, he called me and he said, we sit in horror in New York and watched you do what you did with that guy, and said, we're so thankful you did. He said, we're just so thankful you weren't burned. He said, why in the world? We had no idea that those cars could backfire and explode gas tanks. He said, from now on, you guys have got to be in fire suits, and that's what caused it. I still have the very first fire suit. My wife kids me I have 1,000 fire suits in the boxes, and I have the very first fire suit we ever put us in. I looked like a giant pimento or a pumpkin. It was an orange fire suit, but that's okay. Just they wanted us to be protected, and that's how it all started.
Yeah, that's crazy. I'd read that story about you having to help out with the burns and everything on pit lane, but the story that stands out to me again in Atlanta is the Don Marmer accident.
My gosh.
Which I've followed you my whole career, and I never heard that story before, let alone seen that wreck. And so if you're listening, go to YouTube, Don Marmer ARCA Atlanta crash. Sean saw it for the first time today. That is one of the biggest impacts you'll see back then, and that's before any of the technology we have now. And it's just brutal. But you were on pit lane, I think MRN at the time, maybe ESPN.
It was an ESPN, but it was no live coverage. It was taped going to air like the following Thursday. Yeah. And I'm down in turn one covering the leaders for the ARCA race. And so there's no TV monitors on pit road, no scoring monitors. All we know that it was a bad crash coming out of turn 4 at the other end of pit road, and that they were going to red flag the race. And so since we're tape delay, we just stopped our production. So I'm walking up pit road. There's no, and I just hear these guys in the booth saying, "Oh my goodness!" And I'm walking up pit road. I get about halfway up pit road, and I grab one of the ARCA officials that I know, and I said, "Hey, what's going on? How long is this going to take?" And they said, "Oh, Doc, he's gone." I said, "What?" He said, "The driver is dead up there. We think he's gone." So I took off running. And I run all the way to the end of pit road, and I see this car that's basically impaled in this huge concrete. You see the video; it's horrific. And this big concrete tractor trailer tire filled with concrete, and that car go way up in the air.
They had concrete inside it.
They had concrete inside it.
So if you can't see the video right now because you're driving or something,
Yeah.
basically a car loses it coming out of Ford Atlanta. As he comes down the track, Marmer tries to avoid him. They kind of get together, and that sends him head on into two giant tractor tires, like off of the biggest tractor you've ever seen. And both of these things go flying up in the air. One of them goes like 30 feet in the air. Knowing that it's filled with concrete now is like unbelievable.
And when I get to the car, and I won't go over, but the whole front of the car was pushed in.
Yeah.
His arms were broken and laid back up on his shoulders. Both arms were broken. His chest was impaled on the steering wheel. They had a paramedic that was climbing in the car, and he was, totally unresponsive and comatose. And so I was able to cut his uniform open, and I put a line right there in his heart, in his superior vena cava, to be able to get fluid. So I knew when we jacked the steering wheel off, if we didn't have enough fluid, he would die instantly. And so we did a lot of things there. We got him to the infield care center. There was a primary care doctor, an older general practitioner there, who said, please do what you. So I literally had my ESPN fire suit on, and I'd put my microphone in my pocket. And so we're working with this guy. We're trying to resuscitate him in the care, this little old-timey care center, which back then was underneath the media center at the old racetrack in Atlanta. And I'm telling them, do we have this? Do we have that? No, we don't have this. No, we don't have that. And I was doing everything I could. We intubated him. I'm ventilating him to try to get the intracranial pressure down so he doesn't herniate and die. the helicopter is taking off from Atlanta, and they're telling the guy, the nurse on with the helicopter, they're telling her, if he's not stable, we're not coming. We're not going to fly all that way and pick up somebody. We can't. We don't have any way to stabilize him. And I said, tell him he's stable, and there's no way he's stable.
Right.
I mean, we're seconds away from him. And so we're trying to, the whole time I'm talking to him, he's comatose. I can see one of his pupils was already what we call blown, dilated because of the head injury. And I knew we didn't have a lot of time, so I'm bagging for all I'm worth. We found some medication. I ordered mannitol to put in him and try to shrink the swelling. We didn't know what other internal bleeding he had. I knew he had multiple fractures, but I'm talking to him the whole time, telling him what we're doing. Yeah. Don, this is so and so. We're going to do.
Did you have a relationship with him at all?
No, I'm just. But I know patients will tell you years later that they hear what you're saying. But I wanted him to know as I'm right on top of his face as I'm bagging and what's going on, blah blah. And so we get enough of a blood pressure and heart rate's fluctuating. Helicopter lands. They come in. And I'm basically I'm shouting orders to the medical staff there and to them. And I said, look, and the trauma nurse said, I'm not so sure. I said, look, this guy's a lot more stable than he looks, knowing he wasn't. Right. And they looked at this ESPN fire suit I had on, thinking, yeah. And I said, okay. and one of the officials said, he's a trauma doc. Blah, blah, blah. Right. I said, okay, we got it. So they loaded him up and they made it to Atlanta. Well, this whole time, there's nothing being taped of the telecast. Telecast is all stopped. Then I'm still working on the racetrack. Well, I walk back out, and what I didn't realize is that this microphone's in my pocket the whole time. Everybody in the TV truck is sitting dead quiet, listening to every word I'm saying, listening to all the suction, all the thing I'm doing, and I'm talking to him, the defibrillator, everything we're doing. I take the mic back out. It's okay, guys, I'm back. When I get this applause from the TV trucks, and holy cow! And I said, well, that's what I do during the week. That's my other job.
That was Monday through Friday.
It's funny, he survived, and thankfully he survived. Yeah. We went ahead and finished the telecast. And, all these rescue shows, like Rescue 911, they called and wanted to do a big show about it. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. All these guys from Hollywood called, we want to make a show about it. No, I don't. I said, you make these guys from Atlanta South, the paramedics who were there, those guys should be the heroes. I said, no, they told us you were the guy. I said, no. So we never really did it. The funny thing is that probably, probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe a little longer than that, I got a phone call on Christmas Eve. And I answered the phone at my home, and the guy said, Dr. Punch? I said, yeah. He said, we've been working for a long time to get a number to call you. And basically, it was Don Marmer's son. He said, our whole family, we're here for Christmas Eve. We've been wanting to call you and thank you for Dad. And he said, we can't thank you enough. And it was just, that call meant more to me. He said, we have our dad. He doesn't race anymore, but he's here, and he's, still. And just the fact that, we were very lucky that day. We got very, very fortunate, very lucky.
Yeah, I read a quote of his from years later because he never raced again, but he obviously survived, and I think he walked with a limp or something was his thing. And he said, yeah, without Dr. Jerry Punch, I wouldn't be standing here right now. So
we got lucky that day.
Yeah, pretty impressive situation.
What blows my mind is that you can immediately go on the scene, switch gears, and just go right into, trauma doctor. But my other question is on the tool side. Like the paramedics have a certain number of tools, but where's the line coming from in the bag and all that? Is that the paramedics going back to the ambulance? Or
paramedics have IV fluids on, and they had one subclavian. What subclavian is a big, large bore needle that you put in under the clavicle into the superior, and I had one. I mean, you had one shot. I had one shot. I mean, it's like one take. I got one. If I don't get it in the right that time and get it threaded in, we're not. Things are over. And he's sitting up in the car. But I also know from watching his distress that if we didn't do that and we take this steering wheel, he's impaled on and pull it off, he's going to bleed to death in his chest, and we have no way to control his airway, no way to control his fluid resuscitation. So, and that's what makes you appreciate what these paramedics do on the roads. As a trauma guy, those paramedics are the heroes. And what I was able to do with their assistance and their equipment, we worked together, and the good Lord saved Don Marmer, not me, but we were very, 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 very fortunate. A lot of things had to happen exactly the way they had to happen for him to survive.
Yeah.
So we just ordered. So I've got a question for you. Being a doctor, doing exactly the thing I said that you probably hate. If you're going on a road trip for say like 6 weeks straight, is an all barbecue diet and like Monster Energy drink and chicken wings for
sandwiches.
6 weeks straight, how many years might you be taking off your life?
Well, I don't think. I think the only thing that's bad for you is the. I think that might be the worst, but
We're gonna have to bleep that.
I was like, as a major sponsor of the series we all follow.
maybe shouldn't do that. But
no, I'm just kidding.
but you're not.
Yeah, no. I think going on the road, you don't go on the road if you don't get to sample the cuisine of the area.
Exactly.
You're in Tennessee, you got to have barbecue.
Absolutely.
You maybe got to have a little shot of Tennessee moonshine.
Oh, yeah.
There
we go.
There we are.
Just a couple of jiggers of Monster Energy in that Tennessee moonshine, and you'll be dancing all night long.
That's how you're going to make it to Indy, Sean. I'll drive, and you can just rock it over in the passenger seat.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
It's just a lush. All right, I like it.
Yeah,
Anyway.
basically, we created a fake show just to be able to do that and go meet famous people.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's
and
great.
then people
That's
started
good.
listening to it, so we're like, all right.
Guess
Hey,
we're
you know
doing
what?
this.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Kind of along that same line, I couldn't find much information on the story, but it seemed to be a similar kind of thing. Bill Dennis crash Daytona.
Yeah.
Similar thing where they thought, oh, he's out.
That
and
was
then
when I was first working in Daytona, back when they ran the Permatex 300, the old the sportsman race,
Right.
before they had the Busch Series.
Yeah.
And he had won it, I don't know how many times in a row. He's a legend. And so I was down there helping Ned Jarrett, who was doing MRN. And the night before, and so Ned had a radio show. One of the big things to do in Daytona when you were down there for 2 weeks was Ned hosted a radio show every night at the Club Macombo. The Club Macombo is sort of like the Copacabana down on the beach. It was a place where the drivers all went, and fans would pack in there, and then it was a stage there. And every night Ned would have legends, and they had the top stars that would come sit with Ned for an hour and a half, and he would have like 3 guests a night, and I would help him get them. I sort of was helping produce the show, and I helped get the guys there, and we had a little circular, Caesar's Palace kind of rolled and pleated booth there up front where the celebs
And this is like
came
early
in.
80s?
What's that?
It's like early 80s?
Oh yeah, it was red
in Daytona Beach.
Red,
best time.
It was it was the best plastic you could put in a booth. Best vinyl. And it was like literally, and when you wouldn't have a place, if you didn't have a cigarette, they handed you one.
Nice.
Everybody was smoking,
Yeah,
so
right.
you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you, and you couldn't breathe.
Right.
But the show was, and so the night before, Ned always had a couple of big cup stars. He'd always have Cale or Richard or somebody in Pearson, and then he would have a sportsman driver too. Well, that night we had Bill Dennis. He came in, and so I knew Bill, and he came in and sits down, and he sat with me in the booth for a while because he would come on last. We had the big Cup guys first, the big Winston guys first, and then had Bill.
And sportsman driver in today's room would be like a gentleman driver.
Yeah, he was just like Bill. Bill sat there with the booth, and we talked for a while, and anyway, so the next day. My day is split. Half in the morning I'm working in the infield hospital, and the other half of the afternoon I'm doing PA upstairs. And there was a wreck on the racetrack, and I didn't know who it was. And the car was coming through the tri-oval and qualifying, apparently got out of shape and went down at the bottom of the track, came up and hit the wall head on, right at the start-finish line. And the two guys that were the chief paramedics there were great guys, wonderful guys. And they come in the infield hospital there, the Hannah Medical Center, and they're saying we got one for the tub room. The tub room is a dark area in the back where it was just a big concrete block, center block tub where they used to put drivers in. It had burns years ago, back where they had fire before they had the fuel cells. And so, but if they had a driver that had been killed or lost his life, they'd take him back to the tub room, sort of like an impromptu morgue. He said we got one for the tub room, and I'm looking, and it was just me and another, resident there. The only 2 doctors there. It was in the middle of the day, and I said, "Whoa, wait a minute!" I said, "I went over and looked, and the guy's skin color was black, because he had no circulation. He'd gone from cyanotic blue to black." I said, "Put him back there in the resus room." So I go back there. And I immediately, I cut his fire suit off. I intubate him, trying to get airway going. I'm bagging him. I don't see any chest movement. I don't feel a pulse. We put a monitor on him. We just got a faint pulse. And so I'm bagging him and trying to get some ventilation going. Then they tell me it's Bill Dennis. I knew Bill Dennis. I sat with the man the night before for 2 hours.
And you couldn't recognize him.
Because he looked so. Yeah. And he had a big slice across his neck. Which I later showed Mr. France once we got him resuscitated and got IVs in him and got him going. I brought Mr. France in. I called across. I said, tell nurses, call Mr. France across the street to have him come in. I want him to see this. So he came in there, and he had like someone had taken a razor blade and slit his throat. And what it was, he had one of these houndstooth gold chains on.
Oh,
and you know, back then drivers wore all kinds of jewelry.
Yeah.
And when he spun, hit the wall, that chain just cut his throat. And so I said, you take this chain. He said, I'm taking this to the drivers' meeting tomorrow, and I'm going to show every driver from now on, you're not wearing a metal ring, you wear a rubber ring, and you don't wear any jewelry. Because you see what happened, it cut this guy's throat. Fortunately, it missed his carotid, didn't quite get deep enough, and I was able to pack some things, and he ended up doing okay. We got very lucky that day. But he was cyanotic long enough getting in there, but they thought he was dead. Dead, and to my knowledge, Bill's still around today.
Yeah.
And
wow.
So you got lucky.
Lewis Hamilton, let there be a lesson to you. Don't wear the chains. No, but he's always got bling on and everything. Don't mess up and leave it on. Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. So along your travels, because you're obviously in the scene quite a lot. We haven't really had any of these stories yet, and I'd love to get into more of them, but like any Tim Richmond run-ins, did you ever spend any time around him?
Tim and I were friends.
Yeah.
Tim and I were friends. I was around Tim quite a bit. If you ever watch the Richmond, the 30 for 30 on Tim Richmond,
I loved it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I was a part of that.
Yeah.
And you'll sort of see my role in there, but long story made short, Rick Hendrick and I were friends, and Rick called me and said, I'm going to hire this young driver. I need your help to sort of get him tuned up, and he's sort of a wild man, lives on the West Coast. Will you help me? And so and Rick is in Charlotte. I'm actually working the ER in Daytona, and I said, and the nurses came to me, and we're really busy. He said, there's a guy named Rick Hendrick on the phone. Said, is it for you? I said, yeah, I'll take it. Hang on. So I run back to the nurse's station, take the phone call. He tells me, hey, Doc, I know you're busy. I'm sorry to bother you, but I got this young driver I'm going to hire. You probably heard of him. You know, he ran the Indy, was a rookie of the year, blah, blah, blah. Got a tremendous amount of talent, but he's just a kid. He's a wild. He's just a wild horse, and so we got to get him tuned up. I need you to do sort of a physical on him and try to help me tune him up. I said, all right. He said, well, I said, just have him call me here. And I said, he said, have him call you? I said, have him call the ER. So I told the nurse you might be getting a phone call. And it's like midnight. And I'm working all night. It's like it's like probably more like about 9 o'clock, which is 6 o'clock LA time. Phone rings, and they said there's somebody on the phone that says his name's Tim. He's supposed to be calling you. I can't hear a lot. There's a lot of noise and music in the background. So I go to the phone. He basically said, hey, Tim, I said, Rick told me to give you a call. Man, I said, hey, I said, what's the party going on there? He said, I'm with Aykroyd and Belushi. We're at Dan Aykroyd's place here on Malibu. They're having a big party. We're out here just partying down, man. We're having fun. He said, Rick told me to call you and get a hold of you. I said, man, you don't need to call me. You're not serious about it. I said, Rick's giving you a chance to drive maybe the best opportunity you're ever gonna have in your career, and you're out here partying. You don't want this, man. You don't want this bad enough. No, I do want it. I realize it's a big opportunity. He said, hang on. So what do I got to do? And I simply said this. I said, if you want my help, you need to be in this emergency room before I leave at noon tomorrow. And he said, man, I'm in L.A. I said, well, I'm in Daytona. I said, I'm just telling you that's how it works. I said, I'll help you, but you got to be here. He said, all right, man, where are you? And I told him. I mean, literally, apparently what he did is he had them take him to LAX. He red-eyed to Atlanta, to Daytona Beach, and walked in our emergency room about 10:30 in the morning. No sleep. Hawaiian shirt, flip flops, and a pair of just like shorts on, like they're like swim trunks. Yeah. And he had no luggage, and he walked in and he looked. I said, "Man, you look awful." He said, "Well, I feel awful." And I said, "Well, at least my diagnosis is correct." And so we went back in, and I when I had the other ER doc came in, I took him in the back and did an exam and called Rick, and I said, "This kid, he really does want it." I said, "But he just doesn't know what to do." And so we ended up sending him to the Cooper Clinic in Houston to try to get him all tuned up and put him into a nutrition program and a exercise program, and basically total body shock for him. But when he walked in that day, I'll never forget, he walked in the ER that day. One of the nurses, who was a big open wheel fan, knew who he was. And so she said, can I get a picture? So she had her camera there in the back of her car, like an old Polaroid camera. She went out and took a picture. He got up beside me, and I look by his back. I've been up all night working in the yard. I got a white coat, and I'm all put my arm around each other. He's got his Hawaiian shirt on. She took a picture of us, and I kept that picture for a long time. And then probably 15 years ago, Sports Illustrated wanted to do a story on Tim Richmond, and they came and visited me, and I showed them the picture of Tim. I told them a story, showed them a picture of him standing with me with the Hawaiian shirt and the flip-flops. And they said, well, can we borrow that to put it in a magazine? Well, they lost it.
Oh.
So I don't know. I have no idea where it is. But anyway.
That's painful.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Maybe one of our listeners will find it.
They're powerful. They can do a lot of things. During the whole career of Tim Richmond, I mean, did you, obviously, you're a doctor who's working at a hospital, so you see all kinds of cases and HIV-positive patients and things like that. Were there any signs to you what was going on? Did you have any clue or insight as to what was going on?
No, I didn't really know. Back then, there was not much information out there, and they not until he never really told me until well into he was starting to get sick, and then when he told me, he was already out of the car, and he was in the hospital, and his last few weeks were painful because I'd call him every week.
Yeah.
And talk to him. The nurses would put the phone up there. I'd call his mom and dad. They were living in a condo in West Palm.
Right.
And it was but the funny thing was after every race on Sunday night, wherever I was, cup race, he would watch the cup race.
Yeah.
And I would go back to on the way I'd go to the airport and I'd go to a payphone and I'd call him.
Yeah.
And we didn't have cell phones back then that worked very well. And he'd talk for a few minutes, and we had a bad wreck at Pocono one time, and Lake Speed was in a wreck up there, and I remember he was so lethargic Tim was so lethargic from medication for the pain but all he could say was, how's Lake? Is he okay? He was so worried about his friends.
His peers, sure.
And I remember we were going to Pocono one year when he was really sick, and his mom had told me, she said, the nurses see him now and see what he looks like, and they don't have any idea that a year and a half, 2 years ago, he was one of the most handsome, young, eligible bachelors, cover of magazines. They have no idea what he looked like, and that he was a great race car driver. Is there any way you guys could do something? And I said, yeah. So I'll call our producer, and I called our ESPN producer. I said, look, I said, he's really struggling in the hospital. I never told anybody what was going on, but I said, he only had vision out of one eye, I think, at the time because of the illness. And so, he said, we do a pure later replay at the beginning of every telecast, like about 30 or 40 laps in. I said, we could replay Tim's big win here where he wrecked the car early, bent the frame, came back and outran Earnhardt and Ricky Rudd by inches and won at Pocono. He's celebrating in victory lane. There's the beauty queens all over him. I said, let's do that. That'd be great. I said, that would mean more to me. He said, Doc, we'll do it. And so I called his mom. I said, about 30 laps into the race, we're going to run this pure later replay. So they had it all set up. They brought a big table in, put it across the bed, put a bigger TV on the table, had all the nurses in at the care center of the hospital, and they were watching that, and they said Tim was crying when he saw that we ran that replay. The nurses said, oh, my gosh, look at this kid. Look at this guy. Yeah. But and then it was not long after that he was gone. It was really, really sad.
Sure.
You know, he came to Daytona. You know, his last chance was to come to Daytona and run the Busch Clash, and and he had a ride, and he was deserving because he'd won a pole, but there was a suspicion from NASCAR that he was on drugs or he was whatever, and he had his lawyer down there with him at the Hilton in Daytona Beach where he was staying. And he's in the garage area, and I was sort of the go-between between the Francis and him and the lawyer. I'm trying to convince him, let the boy race. It's 20 laps.
Yeah.
But they were afraid he was going to do something stupid like turn it into the wall and spiral into the stands.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Liability.
And there was some questions that maybe he had some kind of vague illness, you know, that they were worried about. I even went to Dale Earnhardt. I went to Dale Earnhardt and I said, hey, I went to the garage here. I said, Dale, man, they're not going to let Tim Richmond race. All he wants to do is run the Busch Clash. And he said, how's he doing, Dale? I said, not good. I said, that's all I can say. I said, he's going to run the Busch Clash and then be gone. He said, the boy ought to be able to race. He said, Doc, he's probably the only guy in this garage here that can run wheel to wheel with me. He said, he can do it. I said, that boy's got talent. I said, how about helping me out with this one? Dale said, all right, I'll get out and I'll talk to Billy, Mr. France. But Billy said, no, we can't do it. Can't take that chance for our fans. that say that he was going to go out in a blaze of glory, thinking that he might be sick. They didn't really know what it was. They had suspicions, and so, but he kept his bag packed, and he had his uniform and his helmet all in his bag on the counter in the kitchen in West Palm. And every day when he'd go in to be checked at the hospital, and then eventually when he was hospitalized, he'd ask his mom, "My bag's still packed?" He always believed that there was going to be one day he was going to go back and pick up that bag and go to the racetrack. It never happened.
Right.
Never happened.
Well, I don't know how to transition from there, but here's something we can go with. Days of Thunder was loosely based on the story of Tim Richmond. And I think I sent you a text about this, but we do have a pass-along question that we have from the previous guest to the next and so on. So last week, that was last week, it feels like a month ago, but last week we were with Dario. And
Frank Heedy.
Frank Heedy, in case you didn't know, some Italian guy. And what was his question?
Yeah, his pass-along question for you, Dr. Jerry, was what was it like working on Days of Thunder?
Wow, great question. It was a blast. I went to. It's the funny how the thing all started. I went to do Watkins Glen, and we go in the TV compound early on race morning, and it's still dark, and we're there, and my producer says, "I need you to come meet with me and some of our bosses in this office trailer." I go over there, and they said, "We got some guests that are going to follow you around today, and they're going to be your assistants." I look over, and there's a bearded guy there sitting there with a baseball cap on, another kid sitting there with torn jeans and a baseball cap on. He said, "This guy's going to be carrying your batteries, this guy's going to be so-and-so, and they're just going to be watching what you do." I never fazed me at the time. That's all he said. I look over, I said, "All right." And then they always hire local people that are runners and stuff. One carries a backpack with batteries, and one carries bottles of water.
We see it in the IMSA
And then they realized me that it was the writer and Tom Cruise.
That's awesome.
And the writer Robert Town had a hat on with a microphone clipped to it and a wire to a tape recorder. He wanted to hear every interview I did and how I asked the questions, how they answered them. And then Tom was just going to be there watching everything that went on. Yeah. So they were incognito. Nobody else knew. My camera guy.
But Tom Cruise was the guy with like the boom pole and the transmitter.
And so we're about halfway through the race. And Tom pulled his hat off and his sunglasses off. He had torn jeans on, unshaved.
No way you wouldn't know.
Just a baseball cap on. And he pulled his hat off because it was dripped. It was hot down there. And the other handheld camera on ESPN looked over and said, "That's Tom Cruise." And whenever it did one of these numbers, because right after Top Gun had come out. So he whips the camera over. Well, immediately goes on to the jumbotron. Tom Cruise.
And he's
then he had to leave. But from that point on, I mean, he couldn't have been. I mean, he asked great questions. I was on the phone every day to Robert Town. He would call me from his offices there about casting and who you're going to cast in the female lead. And he says to me, because they thought about Kim Basinger.
Who at the time was a huge star,
And I said, well, Kim. I said, Kim is so attractive and so voluptuous. I said, if you're looking for a female neurosurgical resident, you got to have someone who never gets out in the sun. They got white, pasty skin, stringy hair.
Should have an accent.
You got someone that really comes across as an intellectual. Nothing against Kim, but comes across as an intellectual. So he calls me back and he says, "Hey, there's this actress named Nicole Kidman who went to UCLA in pre-med, was a pre-med major at UCLA, and he says she's from Australia, whatever, has a great accent, and he said she was in this movie, and I think it's called The Deep or something. He said go watch the movie, and I did. So I called him back and said she'd be perfect. I think she'd be great. Anyway, that was a blast. Working around Tom couldn't have been nicer. Nicole, Robert Duvall, I love.
Oh yeah,
Randy Quaid is Randy Quaid. He's he's not all connected.
Even then,
but Robert Duvall, you don't find a better person. Robert Duvall, and
by this point, so it was filmed it came out in 90, I believe, filmed in 89, roughly.
But
Duvall at this point, he'd already been through all the Godfather movies and whatnot. Was that intimidating for even somebody like you? To be around a big star like that?
It was he was so unassuming.
Yeah.
And all those guys were. I came to Daytona and I played myself. We probably shot 10 or 11 scenes. I think only like 3 or 4 of them actually made the movie. Most of them didn't make the cut. But they probably have enough enough footage from that, what they filmed, for 2 or 3 more movies.
Really?
They could actually go back and re-edit it and make another movie
Yeah.
out of what they shot, because they shot all the racing footage and stuff. But Tom was great. Nicole was great. Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson. These guys couldn't have been nicer. Bruckheimer especially. What a brilliant guy. They wanted to, I was sort of a helping
Like a consultant on it.
with writing, and we wanted to do certain things to make it more Hollywood. And the director, who was a phenomenal director, who had done, I think, Top Gun and other, he's just, so they wanted to make the finish where Tom would get spun on the last lap at Daytona, bounce it off the wall backwards, put it in reverse, and run down the leaders
in one lap.
And backwards.
In one lap.
And I said, no. You want to make this really hokey? That's how you. I said, we've already seen some hokey racing movies. I said, need to make this thing somewhat legitimate.
Right.
And so they were great. They were couldn't have been nicer. It was a lot of fun to do that. A lot of fun to do it. I mean, it was a great experience for me. I had tremendous respect for. And they would call me in the ER and say, "When can you leave the emergency room? We will send a plane. We need to fly you to Darlington to shoot this scene tomorrow." And I'd get there at midnight, and they'd say, "Well, our crew call for you guys is at 4:45 in the morning. We'll have a car at 4:45 to the hotel." Well, I'm up. I got like 3 hours sleep.
Right.
I get up. I'm showered, shaved, ready to go.
Normal
I
day
go
at the
down in the
ER.
limo. I go downstairs to the hotel in front of the Holiday Inn there in Darlington, and they're in Florence, rather, in the big city of Florence. And here's Nicole sitting in one corner. She's got a bathrobe on and no makeup and no hair. And here's Tom over there sleeping in a robe.
Right.
I didn't realize they take you there and they do everything. They
Right.
shave
Yeah.
you.
They do the whole thing.
All you got to do is shower. They shave you. They put makeup on here.
Right.
I
Yeah,
was
they
ready to
wanna
rock
dictate
and
it.
roll.
Right.
But, and then it was funny.
So are you saying you're more professional than Tom Cruise? Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm just
putting it out
saying
there.
it was a blast. These guys were, and they were just, and like they had one scene where they leased an old hospital that was closing down to shoot that scene with him in the scanner to see the head scan.
Yeah.
And they said, "Well, could you be down here?" And I rushed down from where I was in the ER and went in there. And there's Duvall and Nicole sitting there, and the writers were saying, "What is she supposed to have?" And Tom was actually laying in the scanner, under the scanner. They were getting ready to film it, smoking a cigar. I said, no. You want to make this real? Get rid of the cigar.
Yeah.
You got to strap him down. He can't move. I said, you got to make this really, really an eerie, frightening experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then that's where the lines came from. I'm not accustomed to being alone. Blah blah blah. I've always have someone in my ear.
So that's all done on the spot when they
Exactly.
figured all that
Yeah,
out.
we're doing all that on the spot.
Oh,
and
wow.
then Nicole says to me, what I asked him, and I said, what you want to do? I said, you want to take this helmet and you want to ask the crew chief what the helmet looked like. Was it, where did he hit? Is it scratched front and back? We didn't know specifically, and he may not know, but he can tell you what he thinks happened. Because the mechanism of injury back then, when we didn't have sophisticated scans, was important to know.
Absolutely.
And so stuff like that. I'm standing up like 5 feet from where they're shooting, but giving feeding
kidding.
these lines.
I can never watch it again now. All I'm going to think about is you sitting there going, no.
No, I mean, it's just like, they had a scene where in Daytona, and they had a scene in Victory Lane where I'm going to interview Tom Cruise, and so I go over to interview.
Special tires.
I go over to interview him, and they're in Victory Lane, and I lean down and ask him a question, and I'm you can see I have the lines that I didn't write all the lines with him, but I can see I'm asking the question, and we're in the middle of shooting a scene, and people are everywhere. Tom looks at me and said, whoa, wait a minute. I said, what's that face about? I said, is there a problem? And I said, first of all, I would never ask a driver this question. I said, this doesn't make any sense. He said, well, wait, let's just change it now. I said, you're working with Robert. What would you need to make it real? Well, I had been working all week, so I hadn't had a chance to be on the phone with Robert. So they have a person there at script rewrite. I said, this is what I would ask. So they're saying, okay, hang on. So Tom gets out, tells rewrite, come here, write down what I would ask. Then they have to get on the phone.
Right. And people don't understand that there's a rewriting kind of specialist there.
There's a guy there,
Robert,
and there's a legal person there. They have to get on the phone to Robert.
Oh, for rights and clearances and all that,
at Paramount.
Yeah.
And they have to get on the phone to legal in New York and to clarify that. Well, we're sitting there, and all that happens in about 8 minutes.
Right.
And it comes back to New York, and they clarify that we're certified to do it. So that's when I ask a different question about, and when he gets out of the car.
Okay. Make the tire stick like that. So do you think Robert was sort of back there just like, oh, not this asshole again? Like, was there ever that moment, or was it he was just good with it?
He was great.
That's awesome.
He wanted it to be real. I think he really.
Yeah. That's crazy. So I think our favorite scene in Days of Thunder is when he's trying to make his way to the front, and he decides to put his foot all the way down on the gas, which is apparently the key to passing. Which I don't know if you knew that in your or just shifting into third gear for some reason.
Yeah.
Was that your doing?
No. They had some drivers who were consultants too. Then.
Fair enough.
No comment on.
So obviously, Dale Earnhardt Sr. is, uber legend, uber hero, like, biggest of all names. And one of the things I heard was that when Rusty Wallace had his big crash at Bristol on the front straight, I think it was practice or qualifying or something.
Practice, yeah.
And he barrel rolls the thing a bunch and it caves the roof in. Well, the first thing I read was that you ran right to the scene and I guess his head was collapsed over or something, so he couldn't breathe. Now, how does that, just from a side story, how does that happen without break? Like, could that mean, like, right now I could squish my neck down the right way? Or, like, when I read that, I didn't understand because you had to hold his head up to get air.
Well, he barrel rolls, and the car comes to rest with the wheels down, but he's cocked up on the pit wall. He's like 10 feet from where I'm standing interviewing a driver, taping an interview. Run over there, and the roof of the car is collapsed down from barrel rolling, so it's pushed him down in the seat. Yeah, and I look in the car, and I can't get the window net down. It's all buckled down, and the opening of the window net's down about 6 inches. There's a rust collapse, but I can see he's pushed forward, the seat's pushed forward, and sometimes you can just and I can't, and there's blood coming out of both sides of his mouth, so I don't know if he's bleeding internally, but I can see his chest is not moving, he's not breathing, there's no air going. So in order to be able to get, I don't know if he's got something blocking his airway, if he's bleeding, what it is. But I got to get to him to get the air. So I'm able to get my fingers through the net enough to grab. He had an open face helmet, thankfully. And I can just grab the bottom of his chin and do what's called a jaw thrust to pull his jaw forward enough to clear the tongue to try to get an airway. And when I just got the tip of my fingers on it, I could see his chest wall move a couple inches. I said, I must be able to get it clear enough. Then I'm yelling. Well, Earnhardt was the only other car on the racetrack. And so he slides to a stop. And he's over there, and he sees the car all smoking, and he can't get. He tries to climb in the right side, and it's not open far enough for him to get in. He said, man, what we got to do? What I got to do? I said, got to get this roof up. I got to get to him. I said, I got to get to him. So they're literally, NASCAR runs out there. Bristol they had a couple of paramedics. Didn't have a doctor there at the time. So I happen to be the only guy there, and I wasn't there to be anyway. Right. So Dick Beatty, who was NASCAR director of competition, took his Winston hat off, is holding it in front of my face while I got my finger stuck through what's left of this window net in this bent car, holding his chin, and they're sawing with a saw the roof, and sparks are going everywhere.
They're blocking your face.
They're blocking me from getting burned while I'm holding his neck.
Yeah.
And they sawed it where I could get to him and get an airway. We put him on a backboard, and we were lucky there. We got very lucky.
So the Earnhardt comes running in, and he's like, what do we got to do? He wants to help Rusty like crazy.
Yeah.
And now I'll let you finish the one-liner that I've heard.
Well, once we realized he was okay.
Yeah.
Earnhardt came to me and said that night, because Rusty's in the hospital, and he called back. He's in the hospital. He's watching the race. It's the Busch race that night.
Yeah.
And he calls back to the speedway. They patch him through to the TV truck. He says, it's Rusty called in the hospital. He says, you tell Doc I'm going to be all right thanks to him. And Doc looks terrible. And I had soot all over my face, paint flecks in my hair. I couldn't go back to the hotel. I had to do the race. Right. And so I looked like I'd been in a war zone, which, thanks to Rusty I had. But anyway, before that race started that night, Dale said, well, I guess the word is up and down pit road, you saved Rusty Wallace's life. Why would you do that? And I said, I don't know.
What's incredible to me is that he raced the next night.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He raced that race that he
Yeah.
flipped down the front straightaway, and you had to hold his head up. He got in the car and raced the next day. You know what I mean? Like, when you think about the commitment level back then.
And just being allowed to do it.
Right.
So.
Yeah. That's incredible to me.
That's one of the consistent things I'm noticing with you is that a lot of your stories are about how to get that guy back out on track, whether it's numbing down his ribs just to make sure he gets through the next race. And with protocols the way they are now, with head injuries and whatnot that people can't get in the car. Obviously, these are done in the driver's interest of safety, but is there a fondness of the glory days at all when, you're kind of thinking about, but this guy could have been okay if this was 20 years ago?
Those guys were amazing. When I look at what they did with no power steering, no cool suits. Those cars were like bucking Broncos trying to drive those things. It's just amazing that they were able to, and it's just a different era now. I mean, different era now when, those when it was starting to change, when they started having power steering and some of the young guys would come along. I'll never forget Harry Gant was as tough as they came. Harry would work on the farm all week and but he would, he could do sheetrock. He would hold about 4 panels of sheetrock onto the ceiling with his head and neck while he would hammer it with his arms. Yeah. That's why his neck was like he looked like, smoking Joe Frazier. He's all neck.
Right.
But Harry would get out of the car at Bristol and walk into the driver's lounge. Here's all these young guys laying on the floor and can't even breathe after the race.
Right.
And Harry'd be stepping over them and said, "High school boys," they weren't physically fit because they didn't work.
Yeah.
Right.
They lived in air conditioning. They lived, they had Harry worked on the farm every day.
Well, actually, of that sort of like Harry Gant era guy, who's the guy? Now that you've sort of sat with us for an hour or two, who is the 2 hours too many for you? Who is the guy that we should talk to that we would have never guessed we should talk to, like a Harry Gant style guy?
Harry would be a good one to talk to. I'll tell you who has great stories from growing up would be someone like Andy Petrie. Andy was a crew chief.
Yeah.
And Andy was when I was getting out of, I was still in medical school, and Ned decided he wanted to start a race team for Dale.
Yeah.
He started a team called DAJ Racing, and DAJ stood for Dale, Andy, and Jimmy. Jimmy Newsom's a tire dealer and small. They were high school buddies.
Right.
And Dale was a really good high school quarterback and pretty much a scratch golfer. Turned down a golf scholarship to South Carolina. Andy was he was told he'd be given extra credit if he drove the bus to the bad school, if he would agree to drive the school bus to the bad section of town.
Okay.
So he drove the school bus. He probably had the only school bus that had spoilers on it.
Right.
And then Jimmy was a tire dealer. But that was a race team. Well, Ned called me and said, "You want to be a part of this race team?" I didn't. I said, "Ned, I'm in med school. I got no money. I have less than no money." He said, "But you're a medical doctor. You are about to be, and you can borrow money if you want to be a part." So I borrowed a little bit. So I owned. So it was me and Ned and Dale and on the race team. And so then we went from there to the Busch Series. Well, next thing I know, I'm sitting in the booth at ESPN. I'm calling the race. Nobody knows that Ned and I own that car. I'm calling, here comes a car. I'm thinking, Ned, this ain't right. We're calling the race and we own that car leading. And I said, you can get away with it. You're a dad, not me. So I ended up selling my part to another guy. But Andy Petrie was the crew chief on that car. And great stories of, when I was in med school, still in med school, and I remember gonna go work Hickory Speedway on Saturday night. I drive up on Friday night. They'd call me and say, "Hey, we're trying to get the car together," and they literally used a part of a garage. It was in the back of a florist shop in downtown Newton, and it was one stall wide enough to put the race car in. So I'm down there. I'd go over there with Dale and Andy and help work on the car. Well, one night we're trying to get the engine back in the car, so Dale's driving a pickup truck, and me and Andy are sitting in the back of the pickup truck holding the engine in place while running across the middle of town while we're trying to go put it back in the race car.
Right.
Those are the great stories.
You obviously, the Victory Lane interview is something you've done more than your share of. Is there a specific Victory Lane that's kind of the most precious one to you?
Being around Dale Earnhardt when he won the Daytona 500.
Yeah.
We weren't doing the telecast. It was a CBS.
Right.
But I was doing radio.
Right.
PA, got to be there. Probably Alan Kawicki.
Yeah.
In 1992, when Alan Kawicki went from nothing, literally came on the scene, and some of us MRN guys were taking him out to eat at night because he didn't have the money to go eat.
Yeah.
And he would give what little money he had to his crew guys to go eat. And then he wins a championship, the ultimate underdog.
Yeah.
Driving the Underbird.
Yep.
And we're in Atlanta, and there's no live scoring, so they're telling us from a TV truck he's got to lead this many more laps, or else Bill Elliott will lead the most laps to get the points. So we're trying to tell his crew chief that whole day. Davey Allison could have won the championship, ends up getting wrecked in a wreck with Ernie Irvin, and who ends up taking Davey's ride when Davey loses his life. But that Victory Lane where we're feeding the PA, we're feeding ESPN Live, and the producer says, just say something profound. And here's Alan getting ready to get out of the car. So I basically take over the telecast, and I got to interview Alan Kawicki, who's so emotional. And then he says, okay, and the producer says in my ear, okay, now turn to your right and introduce for the last time, coming out of the garage area for his final lap, the king, Richard Petty.
Right.
So that was Richard's final. Rich comes out with a torn car, makes a lap. We lay out and let all the crowd go. Then I walk down pit road. He comes out up pit road with a damaged car, and he gets out, and you can see tears going down his face, tears rolling down my face. So from Alan Kawicki to Richard Petty's final race, that was also Jeff Gordon's first ever race.
Right.
So you talk about a day that I'll never forget.
Yeah.
That was, 1992.
And obviously at the time you would have had no clue what that really would have meant as far as Alan's story was concerned. Not to keep sort of the somber tone, but stories like Earnhardt or Kenny Irwin or Adam Petty, those are incidents that, right from the moment of impact, it was a grave situation. For somebody like you, are you able to look at a situation like that on site and just know that that's kind of a lost cause? Or is there no such thing as a lost cause?
Some of the more horrific wrecks I've seen, drivers have walked away with unscratched.
Right.
And then when I travel and do corporate events, speaking events, and I show videos of some of the horrific wrecks, and I showed the guy had a 1-inch scratch on the back of his hand.
Yeah.
And I see wrecks that look like nothing.
Right.
Look like a glancing blow, and it's fatality. Yeah. You just don't know.
Right.
You just don't know.
Right.
Switching gears. So the pass-along question, we had Dario asked about the Days of Thunder documentary film you were a part of, as I like to refer to it. So tomorrow we're having sushi for lunch with Scott Dixon, who you are familiar with. If you had a single question you could ask Scott Dixon, anything at all, what would it be?
Now, I'll preface it this way. This past May, there was a lot of warranted exposure when Fernando Alonso came to Indianapolis or on the Indy 500. And Fernando couldn't have been more open, more appreciative, more accommodating of the welcome he got from the drivers, and so appreciated by the fans. And I think he impressed a lot of people how quickly he got up to speed in the Andretti Autosport car, led the Indy 500. If he doesn't have an engine failure, he had a chance to win the race.
Yeah.
A lot of so it impressed. So automatically, a lot of people say, "Well, these Formula One guys are every bit as talented as we thought they were. They can jump in a car and come here and be successful." But then a lot of the IndyCar guys, the Graham Rahalls of the world, others said, "You know what? I bet if we sent one guy over there and put him in equal equipment, we could impress them." And the guy we would send would be Scott Dixon. Scott Dixon is so underappreciated for his cubic talent and what he can do.
Right.
And if we were to send him to Formula One or to NASCAR and said, give him some time to practice and put him in a good car, and he will show you that he can run with anybody. And so there are a lot of drivers in the garage area who said that. So my question to Scott Dixon would be this. If you could pick one place to go, one car to drive for one race, and you'll go there and they'll give you a month to practice and get comfortable, what would it be? Would you go, where in Formula One would you go, or where in NASCAR would you go, and which car would you drive? Now you got to remember, he drives, I know he's got Honda ties now, but aside from that, where would you go and what race would you run? Because I got to believe Scott Dixon would go there and be as competitive as anybody in the field. That's how good he is.
So we've talked a lot about stock car racing.
Yep.
As a young guy from the South, moving into NASCAR is a natural thing. You're obviously getting to hang with the big drivers in that. You're hanging out with Ned Jarrett when you were, starting out as a commentary and track helping guy. What's it like going to the Brickyard the first time to call the month of May?
I never thought that I would ever see or feel or experience anything that could compare to the Daytona 500.
Right.
When you grew up in a Southern boy, sitting on the backyard under the shade trees with a watermelon cut open on a Sunday afternoon after church, listening to the good old stock car boys. But to go to Indy for the Indy 500 and understand the history and watch these guys come by at 240 miles an hour, inches off the ground, and turn left knowing that they're 15 feet from a concrete wall, and they're hoping and praying this car's going to stick. If it doesn't, they're not injured. They're vaporized.
Yeah.
There's nothing left.
Yeah.
The courage it takes, the respect for those guys, and then racing inches apart. But just being in Indianapolis, I did the race. This last year was my 26th Indy 500 to do, and every time I'd go in through the tunnel, I'd get chills, thinking about the great memories of the people that have been there and the great things and the horrible things I've seen, but the respect. And then when the stock car guys started coming up there, they'd come up there intermittently, and the IndyCar people would say, "I want to take you down here, take a couple of these stock car veterans down to turn one. You want to watch IndyCar practice, and to watch these guys come into one and turn left at 235." Yeah. Oh my goodness! I mean, it is a special place. I tell people the same thing my colleague Brett Musburger tells people, and that's, if you have a bucket list, I don't care if you don't have to be a race fan. You don't even have to be a sports fan. You owe it to yourself to go to the Indianapolis 500. It is an experience like none other. Yeah. You know, you need to go to Bristol on a Saturday night in August and be a part of Thunder Valley when they come off the turn and take the green flag, and they'll flash cubes everywhere, and you're surrounded with a tidal wave of people. Yeah. Go to Indianapolis where 300,000+ people are in one spot in one day. It's like nothing else. I mean, I can tell you, I stood there for a number of years. I was the individual who interviewed the celebrities, and I remember standing there. I can't remember what year it was now, and they were on the pace lap, and I was to interview the Grand Marshal, which was Joe Montana, cool, who had just won the Super Bowl for the third time, or whatever. Yeah. So we go to commercial. I'm standing on pit road, and it's an overcast, typical May day, and so his arms are shaking. I said, "Hey Joe, if you're cold, I get one of our ABC jackets and put on you." I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "No, Doc." He said, "Man, it's just the emotion." We're standing at the midpoint of pit road, right where the yard of bricks comes across. Yeah. He's looking behind him and in front of him around. He said, "Just get this down." I said, "There's 300,000 people here. That's more people here today than in all 5 Super Bowls I've played in combined." Yeah. He said, "This is absolutely amazing. It's just the emotion of being there." He was shaking. Here's a guy that's a 3-time MVP of the game. Yeah. So what's that tell you? Yeah. It's amazing. It's an unbelievable experience.
Somewhat tangential off of that. Obviously, you did a lot of this was courtesy of your long tenure with ESPN. I'll start with a joke, but it's half serious. When ESPN laid off 100 on-air personalities this spring, and you were obviously one of them, and you put out what I would say was one of the classiest tweets you could have ever put out. It was nothing bad, nothing angry, just thanking ESPN for 3 decades of service and how much you enjoyed the relationship. Do you ever have moments where you wish you weren't Dr. Jerry Punch? Oh. And you're just such a nice, classy guy. It blows my mind. Where you're like, these mother effers. There was no moment like that.
That's so man. Yeah. You know what? I tell people that I was there for and still am for 32 years. Yeah. And I think back of the people I got to be around. Yeah. And the great announcers and the great producers and directors and the incredible athletes and venues I got to experience. And they could have looked at me anytime and said, hey son, you're a good old boy, redneck from a small town in North Carolina. You go back and be an ER doctor somewhere. Yeah. But they never did. Yeah. They stayed with me. They let me do what I wanted to do. I was a pit announcer. I was a play-by-play announcer. I got to do college football, college basketball, called Indy 500, Sports Center, you name it. I feel so blessed and appreciative. I have a lot of faults, but ingratitude isn't one of them. I am so grateful for the opportunities ESPN gave me and my family. Right. And was I sad that the phone call came? And I think the guy called me was sadder than I was. He said, I can't believe I'm doing this. And I said, hey, it's okay. I said, are you kidding me? I'm so appreciative of and I said, I feel like I still have a lot to give. I feel like I can still call races and call football games, but I understand. Things are, the company is in a situation where financially they need to make some cuts, and I get that. Right. And I said, but by me leaving, maybe there's a couple of young people who will get a chance, the chance that I got 30 years ago. And if I think about it that way, I'm okay. Am I sad sometimes at night when I look up at a football game or a race and wish I was there being a part of it? Yeah, because I miss it. Right. But I have great friends and great memories, and you can't ever take that away.
What do you think the next steps are for you?
I don't know. I don't know. There are people who talk about going back to one of the motorsport series. My family sacrificed a lot. All the years I was gone, I was never there Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and part of Monday. And when I did Thursday night football, I was gone Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I was only home Mondays. My wife's a saint. She helped raise the kids, and now I'm able to do something. I'm able to go tailgate on a Saturday in Knoxville, Tennessee. When I was doing football, I never got to understand what tailgating was about because I was always busy preparing for the game or doing a sports center cut-in or a pregame, and then I'd have to get on a plane and go somewhere. Now I can sit in the parking lot with my wife, and I can go watch my son run through the tunnel.
Yeah.
And he's my youngest, and so I finally get to see what a dad sees.
Yeah.
And I feel blessed for that, So I don't know.
So when you're tailgating, are you like a stomach painted like face? You got a big V or something? No, big
not
T or
enough paint
anything?
for my stomach in town. We have a simple tailgate, but it's we enjoy it.
Yeah.
We have last weekend we had 19 people at our tailgate.
Oh, man, that's a party right there. Yeah.
But you know what? I will say this. I'm so proud. And I text him. I'm so proud of the courage that Dale Earnhardt Jr. showed by saying it was time to walk away.
Yeah.
Courageous move. Proud of what he did. And I text him, and within seconds he texted me right back, said, means a lot. Thank you so much, Doc. Because it was time. With everything he had endured, he needs to be able to have a life. And his family, the way I put it to him was, the Earnhardt family has given enough. Just because you're not in the car doesn't mean you're not a major player in the sport of NASCAR. This sport, we, as NASCAR fans, need you to be a part of it, and you want to be a part of it. You want to have a family. Walk away from driving, stay healthy, and then be a part of what's happening in the sport. So I'm very proud of the courage he showed in making that decision.
So, Dr. Jerry, I got to ask, have you ever been Gunselman?
I had a director that absolutely, I don't know how he shaved in the morning. His arms, he had such alligator arms when it came to picking up the check. Everywhere we went, we'd have meals. We all would take turns.
Right.
This guy who's still directing today for a major network, I don't think I've ever seen him pick up the check. In fact, it was such a common occurrence that one of our other announcers, Benny Parsons, the legendary Benny Parsons, asked him, how in the hell do you wipe yourself in the morning? His arms that short. Because you never picked up a check. And I guess what he did is just Gunselman us.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I appreciate it. I hope you got something out of this anyway.
Oh, you have no idea.
Yeah.
We couldn't appreciate the time you spent with us more, especially a lot of the guys we're meeting this year have not met us, but you literally are here because Marty Smith said, hey, return this guy's phone call. And that's it. There's you've never heard of us, no reason to be here, and you've given us 2 hours.
Marty's a good dude. I got to go take a shirt to my son who just finished football practice, probably just back in his dorm now studying. He's got a big Spanish. He's got a business law exam tomorrow, not Spanish today. I had a shirt. He needs a dress shirt to walk in the ball walk on Saturday, so I had to take one of his shirts down to him. So I'm gonna run that by while I'm down here, and I'll head back home.
Are you gonna be mad at Marty for making you do this?
No, not at all. Marty's a good dude.
Right.
He's just a good old country boy that and he's done so much with. He's just such a real guy.
Oh yeah.
He's just a real. What you see with Marty is what you get. There's a lot of people who are pretense. Marty's not that way.
Yeah.
He's a good dude.
All right. Well, thanks again. And Continental's got the check.
I'm finished.
All right, Jerry Punch, ladies and gentlemen. Unbelievable guy. Before we wrap out of here, just want a quick shout out to Damian Holt, who recommended Dr. Jer Bear and really wanted to hear him, and glad we could make you happy with that one. But moving on, we are going to close this out with the first of our sort of submissions that we didn't know, we didn't meet. The number one complained about feature on Dinner with Racers is free music that we could actually license by promoting new and upcoming bands. The next one is a group called Freek. That's F-R-E-E-K. They're available on CD Baby. Just look up again, F-R-E-E-K. Here's a song of theirs called Nevermind, Nevermind, as in never M-I-N-D and then never M-I-N-E. All right, I'm getting text messages. I gotta go.
Sip. Feel the warm rush through my bone. Face another night alone. Little baby, ginger sweet. I'm back out on the street. Soul stealer, now you're gone. Don't know, can I go on? Never mind, you were never mine. How could I have been so blind? Never mind, baby, moving on. In the morning, I'll be gone. Baby, talk is cheap. The word down on the street. You found another man. I don't know where I stand. Never mind, you would never mind. How could I have been so blind?